70 hours, 4 characters, many expeditions, and probably even more deaths. I feel like I'm ready to review Outriders. And there is plenty to love here, but there is probably even more not to love. So let's get into my review for Outriders. If you go on to enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. As always, let's start with graphics. And I mean, graphically, Outriders looks like a last generation game, and not like a 360 PlayStation 3 era. By last generation, I mean the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One era. Outriders isn't really doing anything special here. You know, there's lighting effects, there's nice textures, there's some environments that look decent enough, although every environment just seems like an absolute battlefield, which is interesting considering that people used to live in a lot of the places that you go to, and there's conveniently placed crates and boxes everywhere for you to hide behind. But outside of that, the scenes that you do get are okay. Like, there's nothing really to write home about here. Everything is basically what you would expect from a last generation game. You know, there's no ray tracing. There isn't anything that's really making this game stand out. On PC, which is what I played it on, there is some stuttering issues, which for the most part have been resolved. I haven't had any in a while during my playthrough. So for the most part, the game runs fine. I haven't seen too many complaints about consoles, but this isn't the type of experience that you should be picking up if you are looking for a real graphical showcase to show someone on the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, for example. Speaking of the lighting, the scenes and the cutscenes here, there is some lighting issues where some of the scenes are too dark, or like the light source spawns from a weird angle, or it changes the color of some of the textures in the shots. Like one of my characters, I had gray hair, and for some reason in half the cutscenes he actually had black, and it seems like it's to do with the lighting just not bouncing off the textures properly. It's fine though, like realistically it's fine, and that's not the main issue with the cutscenes. The main issue with the cutscenes, however, is people Can Fly seem to go for kind of like an action shot with all of the cutscenes. So with every cutscene, it's like a shaky camera angle. You know, they don't really do a lot of cuts. It's always like over the shoulder or on a weird angle, and they kind of just follow the characters around the scene without like cutting in between the faces, which is fine, like if that's the direction they're going for. But I found these to be really obtrusive and kind of annoying to watch, especially the shakiness of the camera angles. I mean, realistically, you are making this game, you know, you're deciding how the camera looks. It's not like John Smith, the camera operator, tripped over a wire and nearly fell over and the camera went all shaky. You know, you're actually making the camera shaky. It's a really weird design decision that I guess, you know, in a lot of film studies, it's, you know, shaky cam is usually about like action and you know, keeps people engaged. But I just found it really kind of annoying. And I really, on my second and third playthrough, I skipped every single cutscene because I just had no interest in watching them. And that's really reflective in the story in some regards as well. And the story is really just a means to an end. You know, you pump everyone full of bullets, then you get some story scenes, and then you move on to the next encounter and you pump everyone full of bullets. And there is some decent reveals at the end of the story, or towards that end half. There's maybe one or two twists that I actually did find interesting. But the thing here is that the setup that I get from, you know, the initial starts of the game and the way it introduces you to the characters and the world of Enoch, it's very sci-fi. And then from that point on, you don't really get any of that sci-fi-ness to it until kind of towards the end, and then even the end resolution is very grounded. And the game kind of reminded me a little bit of Mass Effect in its setup, especially Andromeda in its story setup. Well, actually, maybe that's the issue of the game, but anyway, it doesn't really keep to that sci-fi genre that it's sticking to. You know, it keeps very grounded in its nature, and you know, we are landing on a new planet, and I really wanted to discover what happened to the planet before we landed, and you know, the creatures that we hear and the, you know, the natives and everything. But realistically, all we get is some reskinned human enemies and some mutated creatures is really what it comes out to be at the end. Now, let's take a break and talk about the sound of Enoch.
My name is Nathan Skurlock, xenobiologist.
Dr. Abraham Zahidi, can you explain to us
Zahidi?
what...
Oh my, what an unexpected honor.
Inside the ship, it's still operational. Whatever's playing the signal, it's in here. Let's finish this together.
So the sound in Outriders is an interesting one. In combat, the sound is fantastic. The guns all sound fantastic, although there is that weird weapon that one of the elites has that just sounds like a pea shooter. But other than that, all the guns sound great. They all have a really good punch, especially when you use one of the round's abilities with the classes. The sound that they make is really fantastic. The music and the tracks in the background, however, are just kind of okay. You know, they're there, they're serving their purpose, but they don't stand out, which I personally found odd considering NorZZa was the composer for Outriders, and he's done some great games in the past, including all the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series, which is predominantly what I know him for, but he has been the composer for a lot of really prominent games in the past, and it's interesting to see that, you know, his music here doesn't stand out in Outriders. The voice acting is pretty average, to say the best. You know, the main characters, especially both the male and the female, are very average. There is nothing really to write home about here. There are even cases where things will be said like this, and then the next line will be like this, and it's very jarring. It's clear that they haven't been recorded at the same time, or the audio mixing hasn't been done very well, and it happens too often for it to be a once-off occurrence. It's very regular. There is one voice actor which I actually liked, which is Dr. Zahidi. His voice acting was really well done, and the character fit the character really well, but the rest of the characters, their voice acting was very average, and I wasn't really impressed with it at all. If we just ended the review here, you would probably think that I hate this game. I mean, I haven't really said anything positive about the game, but the funny thing is, I actually kind of dig it for everything that I haven't spoken about yet. The graphics, the story, and the sound, it's all just passable really, but where this game is really interesting and enjoyable, in my opinion, is the combat and the gameplay loop as a whole. The gameplay loop is unapologetically the same 20 minutes of gameplay for literally the entire game. But the funny thing is, it's actually quite enjoyable. You move to a new area, you clear the enemies, you level up, you gear up, and you go again. The classes, the gear, and the mods is what makes this loop the most enjoyable. Fundamentally, the enemy design is completely rudimentary. There is your typical rifleman, there's a close-range shotgunner, there's a melee guy that charges at you, there's a sniper that for some reason in this game literally never misses, and there's a variety of elites, you know. And then basically there are different reskins of these same enemy types throughout the story and into the endgame expeditions. There's a couple of creature combat encounters that you get to break up this monotony, but fundamentally that's the entire game, is reskin enemies, some creature encounters with these really annoying flying guys, and that's it. But ultimately, this game is actually just fun. And what makes it fun is the leveling up process, the skills that all the different classes have and how they can interact with the enemies, and the mods that you can put on them which have drastic effects to those skills. You can make skills work entirely different, do entirely different types of damage, have extra charges, do extra damage, do all sorts of different things just by modding those gear. And that is where the fun lies in this game, is modding your gear, finding new gear, leveling up, changing your build and your gear and how you choose to really take on these enemies and that gameplay loop. That's where the fun lies, and I found that to be really enjoyable, especially when you hit endgame. Now, I'm not a huge fan of time trials, basically like we have here in Outriders. The endgame is fundamentally just multiple time trials with different map layouts, and ultimately once you get to challenge tier 15 you do unlock the Eye of the Storm, which is the final boss and the resolution of the story. But getting to that point will take you a long time, and it's a good thing that People Can Fly knew what they were going for in this game and making the combat and that gameplay loop fun, because once you do complete the story, that is literally all there is just that gameplay loop, and that is why it's still okay to play, and I still find it enjoyable even now after 70 plus hours and just doing that same gameplay loop over and over again. I hit max level with all of the classes except the Pyromancer, and I've been grinding the end game with the 3 classes, and I'm still enjoying the experience. It's not because of the complexity of these encounters, which is something that I think is significantly lacking, is that during the story you get introduced to these cool boss fights like the guy in the volcano and that other guy that comes and harasses you when you do hit the forest. These are these really cool set pieces that all have interesting different mechanics, especially the volcano guy who has 3 different phases. You know, there's AoE things on the ground you have to avoid and move around the combat encounter. It's a really interesting fight, but then in the end game there is none of this. There is a couple of encounters that have a boss, which is just an elite that has a slightly different skin and a bigger health bar. But other than that, they are just these same enemies that you fight throughout the standard game. I was really hoping that when I got to these expeditions, that these boss encounters that you experience through the story would be kind of like a teaser to some of that end game raid content that I could expect in Outriders, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. Even still, the game is just plain old fun. You know, Outriders is the definition of fun factor, and it really outweighs everything else. Not to the point where I would tell you to go out and buy this game immediately. That's really not the case here. This game really only appeals to a specific type of person. There is no PvP and there is nothing else here once you hit the end game other than the expeditions and the gear grind. That is entirely the end game that you get here. There's no microtransactions. The game is unapologetically exactly the same 20-minute gameplay loop for 70 plus hours or however long you choose to play this game. And even still, it's still a fun experience. But should you buy this game? Ultimately, if you do have Game Pass, you should be playing this without question. You know, it's just on Game Pass, on console. You should just pick this up and have a great time. If you're going to buy this game, I wouldn't recommend that you buy it at full price unless you are picking it up with friends that are going to play with you in that co-op experience. Otherwise, I would be waiting for a decent discount, maybe around half price, before picking this up. If you're a big fan of Borderlands 3 or Destiny, those kind of games, you're going to love the grind that you find in this game. But otherwise, if you are a player that likes story, that likes graphics being pushed, that likes, you know, a good sound palette, this isn't going to be the game for you, though there is still a lot of fun to be had here as just a mindless shooter. If you are going to pick up Outriders, why not check out my 25 tips for beginners and veteran players alike. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Australian night times. Hope to see you guys there in the next stream. Thank you for watching this video. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.